A broken horse. A man who refused to give up. Together, they proved that second chances can change everything. Men in worn-out hats and heavy boots leaned against the wooden rails, their eyes scanning the horses being sold. Each one was judged, priced, and taken away without a second thought. In the last pen, a horse stood alone. His coat, once black and shiny, was now dull and covered in scars. His ribs were visible beneath his thin skin, his legs shaky from years of mistreatment. His eyes held no fire, only fear and exhaustion. The auctioneer barely spared him a glance. He knew no one wanted this one. "Next up," he called, almost out of habit. "Who'll take him?" "Let's start low." The crowd murmured. "That one's no good. Won't last a season. Not worth the trouble." The horse lowered his head, as if he understood their words. He had been passed around too many times, never staying in one place long enough to be loved. He had given up. The auctioneer sighed. He was about to move on when a voice, steady, calm, and deep, cut through the noise. "I'll take him." Heads turned. Keanu Reeves stood at the edge of the crowd, his black coat slightly dusty from the road. His dark eyes were locked on the horse, his expression unreadable. He wasn't here for the best horse. He wasn't here for a prize winner. He was here for this one, the one no one wanted. A hush fell over the barn. "Why would he want that old thing?" someone whispered. "Even Keanu Reeves can't save him." But Keanu wasn't listening. He walked up to the pen, slow and careful, as if not to scare the horse. The animal flinched, taking a step back. Years of abuse had taught him that people meant pain. Keanu didn't reach out. He simply stood there, watching. Waiting. A minute passed. Then two. The crowd shifted impatiently, but Keanu remained still. And then, something happened. The horse, trembling and hesitant, lifted his head just a little. His dark, tired eyes met Keanu's. For the first time in a long time, he didn't see a threat. He saw something else, something softer. Keanu gave a small nod, almost as if he understood. "I'll take him," he repeated, his voice firm but kind. The auctioneer, surprised but not about to question him, slammed the gavel down. Sold. The deal was done. Keanu led the horse out of the pen. The animal hesitated but followed, his steps uncertain but willing. The crowd watched in silence as they walked away, man and horse, two souls once broken, now on a path toward something neither of them had ever known before. A second chance. Keanu Reeves stood in front of the horse, his hands resting calmly at his sides. The barn was quiet now, the crowd dispersing after the auction. Some people glanced back, shaking their heads. "Even he can't fix that one," they muttered. Keanu ignored them. He wasn't here for their approval. He was here for the horse. The animal stood stiffly, muscles tense, as if expecting pain. His coat was rough, scars running along his sides. His ribs showed through his thin body. His dark eyes flickered between fear and exhaustion, his breathing uneasy. Slowly, Keanu took a step forward and knelt in front of the horse. He didn't move quickly, didn't make a sound. He simply lowered himself to the horse's level, his movements calm and gentle. The horse flinched, shifting his weight back. Years of mistreatment had taught him to fear humans. To him, they had only ever been cruel. Keanu didn't try to touch him. He just sat there, watching, waiting. Minutes passed. The horse's ears twitched. His breathing remained fast, but he hadn't run. He was thinking, deciding. Keanu finally lifted his hand, slowly, carefully. He reached toward the horse's muzzle but stopped just short, letting the animal make the choice. The horse hesitated. His nostrils flared, eyes searching Keanu's face. There was no force, no demand, just patience. Then, something small but powerful happened. The horse didn't pull away. He let Keanu's hand rest lightly against his muzzle. His body remained stiff, but for the first time, he did not run. He did not resist. Keanu's fingers barely touched him, but that moment meant everything. A flicker of trust. A silent understanding. Keanu's voice was barely a whisper. "We're the same, you and I." The horse blinked. He didn't know what those words meant, but somehow, he felt them. Keanu slowly stood and turned toward the stable hand. "I'll take him," he said again, this time with certainty. The stable hand hesitated. "Sir, are you sure? This one, he's not like the others. He's not trained, not strong. He might never be." Keanu only smiled. "That's okay. The papers were signed. The horse was his." As he led the animal away, people whispered behind him. "Even Keanu Reeves can't fix that one." Keanu heard them, but he didn't care. He had never been one to listen to what others thought was impossible. Because sometimes, the most broken things just need someone to believe in them. Keanu Reeves brought Shadow to his secluded ranch, far from the noise and judgment of the world. The land stretched wide, open fields bordered by tall trees. It was quiet, safe. But Shadow did not feel safe. Not yet. For the first few days, he stayed at the far end of the paddock, his body tense, ears always alert. He didn't come when called. He didn't take food from Keanu's hand. He didn't trust. Keanu understood. He didn't force him. He didn't try to control him. Instead, he simply existed beside him. Each morning, Keanu sat on a wooden chair near the fence, drinking his coffee, flipping through an old book. He didn't look at Shadow, didn't pressure him. He was just there. In the afternoons, he played his guitar under the oak tree, the soft sound of the strings drifting through the air. Some days, he worked on the ranch, fixing fences, carrying hay, never speaking, never approaching too fast. Shadow watched from a distance. He didn't run, but he didn't come closer either. Then, one night, everything changed. A storm rolled in. The wind howled, rattling the windows. Rain poured, turning the ground into mud. Thunder rumbled in the distance, shaking the earth. Keanu sat inside, reading by the dim light of a lamp, the storm raging outside. Then, he heard it. A soft noise, almost drowned by the rain. He turned toward the window. There, standing just beyond the glass, was Shadow. His black coat was soaked, water dripping from his mane. His ears were back, his muscles tense. But he was there. He was looking, not with fear, but with something else. Keanu didn't move. He didn't open the door or call him inside. He just met Shadow's eyes. For the first time, the horse had come to him. A silent moment passed between them, the storm raging around them, but inside, there was only stillness. Then, as quietly as he had come, Shadow turned and walked back into the night. Keanu exhaled slowly. He knew what had just happened. The first sign of trust. Training began the next morning, but not in the way most people expected. Keanu Reeves didn't use ropes or whips. He didn't shout commands. He didn't force Shadow to obey. Instead, he gave him choice. Each day, Keanu stood near the paddock, waiting. Sometimes he held a brush, sometimes a simple rope. He never approached first. He let Shadow decide. Days passed. The horse stayed distant, always watching. But something had changed since the night of the storm. Shadow didn't flinch as much. He didn't run when Keanu moved. Then, one evening, the first breakthrough happened. Keanu stood by the fence, holding a brush in his hand. Shadow stepped forward, not much, just a few inches. Keanu didn't react. He let the horse come to him. Shadow hesitated, then lowered his head slightly. Slowly, carefully, Keanu reached out and touched his coat. Shadow didn't pull away. Keanu brushed his back in slow, steady strokes. The horse's muscles twitched, but he didn't run. For the first time, he allowed himself to be cared for. A few weeks later, the next step came. Keanu stood in the open field, the saddle nearby. He didn't force Shadow into anything. He simply placed the saddle on the ground and waited. Shadow sniffed it but stepped back. Keanu nodded, picked up the saddle, and walked away. The next day, he did the same. Shadow came closer this time. By the fifth day, he didn't step back at all. Keanu placed the saddle on his back. Shadow tensed, but he didn't resist. A deep breath. A quiet moment. Then, Keanu mounted him, moving with complete calm. Shadow stood still. Keanu whispered something, soft, reassuring. And then, they moved. It wasn't fast. It wasn't powerful. But it was trust. The final moment came at sunrise. Keanu led Shadow to the open field, unsaddled, free. He stood back, giving him space. For a moment, Shadow just stood there. Then, he ran. Not from fear. Not from pain. But from freedom. Keanu watched as the horse galloped across the open land, his black coat shining under the golden sun. He had once been broken, afraid. But now, he was whole again. And for the first time, Shadow wasn't running away. He was running toward something new. Flags waved in the wind, and the stands were packed with spectators. This was no ordinary event. Only champions competed here, trained, polished, and perfect. And then there was Shadow. Keanu Reeves led him onto the track. The black horse moved with quiet strength, his scars still visible beneath his shining coat. He wasn't like the others. He had no fancy pedigree, no history of winning. The crowd noticed. "That's the auction reject," someone laughed. "He won't even make it past the first lap." Keanu ignored them. He wasn't here to prove them wrong. He was here for Shadow. As the race was about to begin, Keanu leaned close to his horse. His voice was low, steady. "This isn't about winning. Just run like you always do, free." The horn sounded. The gates opened. Shadow hesitated for just a second. The noise, the crowd, the energy, it was all new. The other horses surged forward, their hooves pounding against the dirt. For a moment, the past threatened to pull him back. The fear, the pain, the doubt. Then, Keanu whispered, "We don't quit." Shadow took a deep breath. Then he ran. At first, they trailed behind. The gap was wide, the other horses powerful. But Shadow was not just any horse. He had fought harder than any of them. With each stride, he gained speed. His muscles stretched, his hooves barely touching the ground. The crowd's laughter faded into silence. One by one, Shadow passed the others. His movements were smooth, effortless, as if he had been born for this moment. The final turn came. The finish line was ahead. The leader was just in front, a champion known for his speed. Shadow pushed harder, Keanu moving with him, their bond unshaken. In the final stretch, they were neck and neck. Then, Shadow crossed the finish line. Not first. But it didn't matter. Because at that moment, the entire arena stood up. No one was laughing now. They weren't just looking at a horse. They were looking at a story, of struggle, trust, and redemption. Keanu patted Shadow's neck, a proud smile on his face. They hadn't come for a trophy. They had come to show the world what was possible. And they had won something much greater: respect. The crowd had long since left, the cheers fading into memory. The race was over, but for Keanu and Shadow, the journey was far from finished. They stood together in the quiet, away from the arena, away from the noise. Shadow's coat glistened in the fading sunlight, his muscles relaxed, his breathing steady. He was no longer the frightened, broken horse from the auction. He was something more now. Keanu ran a hand down his neck, feeling the warmth, the steady heartbeat beneath. "You did good," he murmured. Shadow let out a soft breath, nudging Keanu's shoulder in return. It had never been about winning. Not today. Not ever. It was about proving that broken things could heal. That scars, visible or not, didn't define who you were. That second chances weren't just given, but earned. Keanu mounted Shadow, not for a race, not to prove anything, but simply to ride. As they left the arena behind, the wind picked up, brushing against them like an old friend. The open fields stretched before them, endless and free. With a soft nudge, Shadow took off, not running away, but running toward something new. The world blurred past them, but Keanu wasn't thinking about the past or the future. Only the present. Only this moment. A man and his horse. A bond unbroken. A ride that would never truly end.